My girlfriend needs this more than you do. Desperate woman. Brandon said those words while looking straight at me, his hand resting on her shoulder like he was presenting a gift to the room. His girlfriend, Emma, stood beside him wearing an expression that tried to be humble but kept slipping into something that looked more like victory. She was 22, 3 months out of university, and had been dating the owner's son for maybe 6 weeks. I had been with Colton Industries for 7 years. 7 years of building something that nobody else had managed to build before I arrived. The leadership position for international sales was supposed to be mine, not supposed to be in the way people say things they hope might happen, supposed to be in the way things get decided, approved, and then announced. I had already been told by 3 different people in upper management that it was happening. They had asked me what my vision was for the role. They had discussed salary adjustments. They had even mentioned the timing of the announcement. Everyone who worked in that building knew it was coming. Everyone, except Brandon, apparently, who had other plans. You will stay where you are and train her. Understood? He said it like he was doing me a favor by letting me keep my current position. Like I should be grateful he was not throwing me out entirely. Around us, other people in the room had stopped talking, not because they were trying to listen, but because the words Brandon used had made continuing their own discussions feel wrong. Someone coughed. Someone else looked down at their notepad like they had suddenly remembered something urgent they needed to write. Emma shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and for just a second I thought maybe she felt uncomfortable too. But then she smiled at me, a small, polite smile that said she knew this was awkward, but hoped we could all just move past it quickly. Completely, I said. Just that one word. Brandon seemed satisfied. He nodded and turned to say something to Emma about getting her started next week. I watched them walk away together, his hand still on her shoulder, already talking about something else. The moment was over for him, for her too, probably. They were moving forward into whatever came next, and I was supposed to follow along and make it all work smoothly. My name is Kate. Nobody in that room knew what Brandon had just done. Not really. They saw him give a leadership role to his girlfriend instead of to me, and that looked bad, sure. It looked like favoritism and poor judgment, and the kind of thing that happens when someone born into ownership thinks the rules do not apply to them. But what they did not see was the specific thing he had just handed away. Not the title, not the salary, not even the status. The actual thing that made Colton Industries successful in international sales. Me. Not because I was special or irreplaceable in some grand way, but because for 7 years, I had built relationships with people in 28 countries, and those relationships were not about business. Not really. They were about showing up, about being present, about treating another human being like they mattered beyond what they could do for you. When I started, Colton Industries sold products in 3 countries, outside our own. 3. The previous person in my role had tried expanding by sending out catalogs and pricing information, and hoping someone would respond. It worked about as well as throwing seeds on cement and expecting flowers. I did something different. I got on planes. I met people for meals. I learned their names, the names of their children, what mattered to them beyond just business transactions. I remembered birthdays. I asked about grandparents who were sick. I showed up when shipments went wrong instead of just sending an apology through a message. I became someone they could trust, not Colton Industries. Me, Kate, the woman who answered when they needed help, the one who did not disappear when the sale was finished. Before I go further, I want to say thank you for listening to what happened to me. Sharing this with someone who actually wants to hear it means more than you might realize. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from. I am curious how far this story reaches and whether what happened to me sounds familiar to anyone else out there. Now, back to what Brandon did not understand. Emma was smart. I could tell that within the first week of training her, she had good instincts for reading numbers, for understanding what made a deal profitable, for asking questions that showed she was paying attention. On paper, she probably looked like a reasonable choice for the role, if you ignored the obvious problem of her dating the boss's son and having no actual experience. But intelligence is not the same as wisdom, and knowing how things work is not the same as understanding why people do what they do. She thought business happened through presentations and proposal comparisons and negotiations over percentages. She thought if you had the best product at the right price, people would buy. That works sometimes, in some industries, with some buyers. But the people I had spent 7 years building trust with did not work that way. They bought from Colton Industries because they trusted me, because I had proven over and over that I would not abandon them the moment something went wrong, because I treated them like human beings instead of opportunities. I spent 3 weeks training Emma. Brandon wanted it done faster, but even he could not figure out how to compress 7 years of relationship building into a few days. I gave her everything she asked for: lists of buyers in each country, notes about their preferences, their communication styles, what time of day they usually responded to messages. I explained which deals were almost finished and which ones needed more patience. I told her about the buyer in Jakarta who would only have serious discussions after sharing a meal together first, because business separated from human connection felt disrespectful to him. I told her about the distributor in Sao Paulo who needed 3 days to think about any significant decision, and that pushing for a faster answer would make him shut down completely. I told her about the woman in Lagos who had teenagers at home and appreciated when I asked how they were doing. Emma wrote everything down. She asked good questions. She seemed genuinely interested in learning. But I could see it in her expression sometimes, this look that said she was absorbing the information but not really believing it mattered as much as I claimed. She thought I was being sentimental, that all these personal details were nice extras but not the real foundation of why these people bought from us. She would figure out her own approach. I could tell. Something more efficient, more professional, more focused on what actually mattered, which, in her mind, was the product quality and the pricing structure. Brandon checked in twice during those 3 weeks. Both times he asked Emma how it was going, not me. Both times she told him it was going well, that she was learning a lot, that she felt ready to take over soon. He seemed pleased, proud, even, like he had made a smart decision and it was working out exactly as he had planned. He did not ask me anything, not how I felt about the situation, not whether I thought Emma was actually prepared, not whether I needed anything from him. I had become invisible except as a tool to prepare his girlfriend for the role he had taken from me. On the last day of training, Emma thanked me. She seemed sincere about it. She said she appreciated how patient I had been, how thorough, how willing I was to share what I knew. She said she hoped we could still work together well, even though things had changed. I told her I hoped so too. I smiled. I shook her hand. I wished her luck. And then I went home and did what I had been planning since the moment Brandon said those words about his girlfriend needing my position more than I did. I pulled out my personal phone, not the one Colton Industries provided, my own, the one with numbers I had collected over 7 years, given to me directly by people who wanted to be able to reach me even outside of normal business hours, the one they used when something urgent came up, or when they just wanted to share good news about their lives. I started writing messages, personal ones, different for each person, because each relationship was different. I told them the truth. Nothing dramatic, nothing designed to hurt anyone, just honesty. I explained that the company was making changes, and I would not be their main contact anymore. Someone new would be reaching out soon. Her name was Emma. I wished them well. I thanked them for the years of trust they had given me, for treating me like a friend instead of just a voice trying to sell them something. I told them I hoped their families were healthy and their businesses continued growing. That was all. No complaints about Brandon, no warnings about Emma, no attempts to sabotage anything directly. Just a person saying goodbye to people she cared about, people who had become part of her life over 7 years of showing up. I sent 43 messages that night. Some were long, some were short. All of them were honest. I knew that Colton Industries monitored the work accounts, watched what employees said to buyers, tracked communications for quality and compliance. But these were my personal relationships, built on my own time, through my own effort. The numbers in my phone were not company property. The trust those people had in me was not something Brandon could take and hand to someone else like a set of keys. 3 days later, Emma sent her first messages as the new leader of international sales. I saw the templates she used because she asked me to review them before sending. They were professional, well-written, clear about who she was and what her role would be. She introduced herself, mentioned her background, expressed excitement about working with them moving forward. Everything you would expect from someone taking over a business relationship. Everything correct and proper, and completely missing the point. The responses started coming back within a week. Most were polite. They welcomed Emma, said they looked forward to working with her, mentioned they hoped the transition would go smoothly, but the tone was different. I could feel it even though I was not the one receiving the messages anymore. Emma showed me a few, asking if I thought they seemed positive. I said yes, they seemed fine. And they did seem fine. If you did not know what warmth actually looked like from those people, if you had not spent years learning the difference between politeness and actual enthusiasm. The buyer in Jakarta responded to Emma's introduction with 3 sentences: polite, professional, brief. This was a man who used to send me paragraphs about his daughter's graduation, about the new restaurant he wanted me to try next time I visited, about how grateful he was that someone actually understood his way of doing business. 3 sentences. Emma did not notice anything wrong. She thought it was a successful first contact. The distributor in Sao Paulo took 5 days to respond. When Emma mentioned this to Brandon, he told her that was normal, that buyers are busy and do not always respond immediately. I said nothing. I knew that man responded to my messages within hours, sometimes minutes. 5 days meant he was deciding something, weighing something, reconsidering something he had previously felt certain about. The woman in Lagos did not respond at all for 2 weeks. Emma sent a follow-up message, then another one. She started getting anxious, asking me if this was normal behavior for that buyer. I told her that sometimes people get busy, that patience was important, that pushing too hard would make things worse. All of that was true. What I did not say was that the woman in Lagos was probably hurt, that she had thought of me as a friend, someone who cared about her teenagers and asked about her mother's health and remembered which holidays mattered to her family. And now I was gone, replaced by someone sending template messages about product availability and pricing structures. Brandon noticed nothing. He was busy with other things, confident that the transition was handled and Emma would do fine. He stopped checking in after the first 2 weeks. Emma was on her own, trying to maintain relationships she did not understand were already dissolving. The first actual loss came from a buyer in Toronto. Small account, not critical to the company's overall success, but someone I had worked with for 4 years. He sent a message saying his company was making changes to their supplier relationships and would not be renewing the arrangement with Colton Industries. He thanked Emma for her time and wished her well in her new role. Emma was confused. She showed me the message, asked if there was something she should have done differently. I told her that sometimes these things happen, that business relationships end for all kinds of reasons, that it probably was not anything she did wrong. That was true too. It was not anything she did wrong. It was just that she was not me. She had not spent 4 years proving to that buyer that someone at Colton Industries actually cared whether his business succeeded. She had not asked about his son who was applying to universities. She had not remembered that he hated being contacted on Fridays because that was when his workload was heaviest. She was professional and competent and completely lacking the history that made him want to continue the relationship. 2 more accounts ended within the next week, both with similar explanations: changes in supplier strategy, new directions from upper management, budget reconsiderations, all the polite corporate language that means we are choosing to go somewhere else but do not want to explain exactly why. Emma started looking stressed. Brandon started paying attention again, asking what was happening, why these buyers were suddenly leaving. Emma did not have good answers, because the real answer was not something she could see or measure or fix with better presentations. Then came Munich. Andreas was the buyer I had spent 3 years building toward, not just building a relationship with him, but understanding his company's needs, their growth plans, their frustrations with previous suppliers who treated them like they should be grateful for the opportunity to buy. Andreas wanted a partnership, not a transaction. He wanted to work with people who understood that business was not just about money changing hands. It was about reliability, about trust, about knowing the person on the other end would actually care if something went wrong. We had spent months negotiating a 3-year arrangement that would have changed everything for Colton Industries. The amount was more than all our other international sales combined. Andreas had already gotten approval from his board. We were waiting for final signatures, just paperwork and timing. It was happening. Everyone knew it was happening. Brandon had even mentioned it to his father, taking some of the credit for the company's upcoming success. Emma reached out to Andreas to finalize everything. She sent a detailed message explaining who she was, that she would be handling the relationship moving forward, that she was looking forward to completing the arrangement we had worked so hard to build. Professional, thorough, confident. Andreas responded 4 days later. His message was brief. He said his company had decided to go in a different direction. No explanation, no negotiation, no anger or frustration. Just a polite statement that the arrangement would not be moving forward. He thanked her for her time and wished Colton Industries success in the future. Emma stared at her screen for a long time after reading that message. Then she came to find me. Her face had lost color. Her hands were shaking slightly. She asked me what had happened, what she had done wrong, why a deal that was supposedly finished had suddenly disappeared. I told her I did not know, that sometimes buyers change their minds. That business can be unpredictable. She did not believe me. She knew something else was happening, something she could not see. Brandon found out 2 hours later. I heard him before I saw him, his voice carrying through the building as he shouted Emma's name. When I looked up, he was moving toward her workspace, his face red, his movements sharp and angry. Other people stopped what they were doing, not because they wanted to watch, but because the sound of Brandon losing control was impossible to ignore. "What happened?" he said. It was not really a question. Emma tried to explain. She pulled up the messages, showed him everything she had sent, everything Andreas had replied. Brandon read through it quickly, then read it again, looking for something that would explain why 3 years of work had just evaporated. He asked Emma if she had said something wrong, done something to upset Andreas, changed any of the terms that had been agreed upon. She said no, that she had followed everything exactly as it was supposed to happen. Brandon turned and looked at me. I was sitting at my workspace, close enough to hear everything but far enough to pretend I was focused on my own tasks. He walked over. His expression was different now, not just angry, suspicious. "Did you talk to him?" he asked. "To Andreas?" "No. You told me Emma was handling international sales now. I have not contacted any of the buyers since the transition." All of that was true. I had not talked to Andreas. I had sent him a message 3 weeks earlier, before Emma took over, letting him know that changes were happening and someone new would be his contact moving forward, just like I had done with everyone else. Brandon stared at me for a long moment, trying to decide if I was lying, but there was nothing to catch me in. I had done exactly what I said, nothing more, nothing less. He went back to Emma. He told her to figure out what went wrong and fix it. She said she would try. He said trying was not good enough, that this arrangement was critical, and losing it was not acceptable. Then he left. Still angry, still looking for someone to blame. Emma sent 3 more messages to Andreas over the next week, each one more desperate than the last, asking what had changed, whether there was anything that could be done to revisit the decision, whether she could speak with him directly to address any concerns. Andreas did not respond to any of them. He had made his choice, and no amount of professional pleading was going to change it. I felt something during those days. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not joy at watching Emma struggle or Brandon panic. Something more complicated than that. I had spent 7 years building something real, something that mattered, something that required actual effort and care and presence. And Brandon had taken it from me like it was nothing. Like my work was just a position that could be transferred to whoever he wanted to impress. Watching it all fall apart felt like the world was finally acknowledging what he had refused to see. That relationships are not things you can hand to someone else. That trust is earned through time and consistency, and actually giving a damn about people beyond what they can do for you. But I also felt sad. For Emma, who was smart and trying her best, but had been set up to fail by someone who claimed to care about her. For the buyers, who had lost someone they trusted and were now dealing with uncertainty. For Colton Industries, which was about to suffer because Brandon thought his girlfriend deserved my job more than I did. None of them had asked for this. None of them deserved what was coming. 11 days after I said completely, Brandon was screaming about betrayal. He was running through the building, his voice loud enough that people in other departments could hear him. Someone had sabotaged the company. Someone had deliberately destroyed relationships he had counted on. Someone had turned the buyers against Colton Industries, and he was going to find out who. Emma was crying at her workspace. Not loud, dramatic crying, but the quiet kind that comes when you realize you are failing at something and do not understand why. Other people were pretending not to notice, keeping their heads down, moving through their tasks like nothing unusual was happening. But everyone knew. The whispers had already started days earlier, spreading through the building like water finding cracks. The international sales were collapsing. The big arrangement from Munich was gone. Emma was struggling. Brandon was losing control. I watched him search for someone to blame. He pulled up records of communications between Emma and the buyers, looking for evidence that someone had interfered. He questioned other people in sales, asking if they had noticed anything strange, anyone contacting the international accounts who should not have been. He even asked the technology department to check if there had been any unauthorized access to company systems. He was convinced something criminal had happened, some act of corporate sabotage that explained why his plan had failed so completely. But there was nothing to find. Emma had sent her messages properly. Nobody had accessed accounts they were not supposed to. No one had contacted the buyers through company channels to undermine her. Everything looked normal on paper, which made Brandon even more frustrated because he knew something was wrong but could not identify what. The accounts kept disappearing. Sao Paulo ended their relationship next, followed by 2 buyers in Eastern Europe, then someone in Singapore who had been with Colton Industries for 5 years. Each time, the explanation was similar. Changes in strategy, new priorities, different direction. All the vague corporate language that really just meant we do not want to work with you anymore but are too polite to say why. Emma lasted another 2 weeks before she quit. She did not make a big announcement or cause a scene. She just came in one morning, went straight to Brandon's workspace, and told him she could not do this anymore, that she had tried everything she knew how to try, and it was not working, that she felt like she was drowning and did not understand what she was doing wrong. Brandon tried to convince her to stay, told her it would get better, that she just needed more time to adjust. But Emma was done. She packed her things that same day and left. I saw her walking toward the exit, carrying a box with her few personal items, looking smaller somehow than she had when Brandon first introduced her as the new leader of international sales. I felt bad for her. That surprised me. I had expected to feel vindicated, maybe even happy that she was experiencing consequences for taking something that should have been mine. But watching her leave just made me feel tired. She had not asked Brandon to do what he did. She had not demanded my position or schemed to take it from me. She was just someone young and inexperienced who had been handed an impossible situation by someone who claimed to love her but really just wanted to show off. Brandon had hurt her almost as much as he had hurt me, just in different ways. The real explosion came 3 days after Emma left. Brandon's father, Gregory, who owned Colton Industries and usually let his son handle operations without much interference, called a meeting. Not with the whole company, just with Brandon and a few key people in management. I was not invited, but I heard about it afterward from someone who was there. Gregory had finally looked at the numbers, at what was actually happening to the international sales that had been carrying the company's growth for years, and he was not pleased. According to what I heard, Gregory asked Brandon to explain what had happened. Brandon tried to defend himself, said that Emma had been qualified on paper, that the training had been thorough, that the buyers were being unreasonable. Gregory listened, then asked a simple question. Why did you give Kate's position to your girlfriend? Brandon apparently did not have a good answer for that. He said something about wanting to bring in fresh perspectives, about Emma having new ideas that could benefit the company. Gregory asked what those new ideas were. Brandon could not name any. The meeting did not last long after that. Gregory told Brandon he was being removed from his oversight of sales operations, that he would be reassigned to a different area of the company where his decisions would have less impact, that Colton Industries could not afford to lose any more accounts because Brandon wanted to impress someone he was dating. Brandon tried to argue. He said he had been trying to do what was best for the company, that the situation was more complicated than it looked, that he deserved another chance to fix things. Gregory said no. The decision was final. I found out about all of this from Jennifer, who worked in operations and had been in the meeting. She told me quietly, in a corner of the building where nobody else could hear, her voice low and careful. She said Gregory had mentioned my name specifically, asked why nobody had thought about what would happen when they pushed out the person who had actually built the international relationships. She said Brandon had not had an answer for that either. 2 weeks later, Colton Industries announced they were reducing staff. 23 people lost their positions, most of them in departments that had relied on revenue from international sales to justify their size. I knew some of them. Good people, hard workers, people who had done nothing wrong except work for a company where the owner's son thought he could hand out positions like party favors. They packed their things and left, just like Emma had, carrying boxes and looking confused about how their stable jobs had suddenly disappeared. I felt responsible for that, even though I knew intellectually that I was not the one who had made the choices that led to it. Brandon had done that, but my decision to step back, to let the relationships dissolve naturally instead of trying to hold them together despite what had been done to me, had consequences for people who had nothing to do with any of it. That weight sat heavy in my chest for weeks. Still does. Sometimes, when I think about their faces as they left the building for the last time. The calls started coming during the third week after Brandon's removal. Not from Colton Industries, from other companies. People I had never worked with directly, calling to ask if I was looking for new opportunities. The first one confused me until the woman explained that she had spoken with Andreas in Munich, who had mentioned I was no longer with Colton Industries and might be available. She said Andreas had spoken highly of me, that he thought I would be an excellent fit for their team. 3 more calls came that week. Then 2 the following week. Then someone from Jakarta, the buyer who had sent Emma just 3 sentences when she introduced herself. He said his company was expanding and they needed someone to help build relationships with new suppliers. He said he trusted me, that he knew I would approach it the same way I had approached everything else, with care and attention to people as humans rather than just opportunities. He said if I was interested, he would make sure the offer was worth my consideration. I took that position, not because it paid more than Colton Industries had, though it did. Not because it came with a better title, though it did that too. But because the man offering it had seen me at my best and wanted that for his company. Because he valued the same things I valued. Because working with someone who understood why relationships mattered felt like breathing after holding my breath for months. 1. Brandon never apologized. I did not expect him to. People like him rarely recognize what they have done wrong, even when the consequences are obvious. He moved to his new role in a different part of Colton Industries, kept his head down, stopped making big decisions about other people's careers. I heard he and Emma broke up a few months later. Apparently she had trouble forgiving him for putting her in a position where she was set up to fail, then getting angry at her when she did. I never told anyone the full story of what happened. Not at my new position, not to the buyers who helped me find it, not even to friends who asked why I had left Colton Industries after so many years. I just said it was time for a change, that I had found a better opportunity, that sometimes things work out the way they are supposed to. That was true enough, more true than the version where I was the victim of someone else's bad judgment, or the version where I was the architect of Brandon's downfall. The actual truth was more complicated than either of those narratives. I had not sabotaged anything. I had not lied or manipulated or done anything dishonest. I had simply stepped back and let people make their own choices about who they wanted to work with. The buyers in 28 countries had chosen not to continue relationships with someone they did not know, did not trust, had no history with. That was their right. Brandon had assumed those relationships belonged to Colton Industries, that they could be transferred like equipment or inventory. He learned they could not. Emma learned that taking something you did not earn comes with a weight that is hard to carry. And I learned that sometimes the best response to injustice is not fighting or arguing or trying to prove your worth to people who should already see it. Sometimes it is just stepping aside and watching what happens when people have to face the natural results of their choices. I think about Brandon sometimes, about what he said that day. My girlfriend needs this more than you do, desperate woman. I wonder if he understands now what he gave away. Not just my position or the international sales or the arrangements that were about to close, but the chance to learn that people are not interchangeable, that relationships matter, that trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Probably not. Some people go through their whole lives without learning those lessons, protected by money or family connections or sheer stubborn refusal to see what is right in front of them. But I learned something too. I learned that I had built something real. Something that lasted beyond the company that employed me. That the 7 years I spent showing up, being present, treating people like they mattered, had created something that could not be taken from me even when someone tried. Those relationships, that trust, that reputation followed me to my next position, and the one after that. They became the foundation for everything that came afterward. So when people ask me if I got revenge on Brandon for what he did, I do not really know how to answer. Because revenge sounds intentional, and planned and satisfying. What happened felt more like gravity, like watching something fall, because that is what things do when you stop holding them up. I did not push Brandon. I just stopped catching him. And sometimes, that is enough. Thank you for listening to what happened to me, for staying with this story all the way through, even the parts that were uncomfortable or complicated or did not have simple answers. If this resonated with you, if you have ever had someone take credit for your work, or hand your opportunities to someone else, or treat you like you were replaceable, leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember that sometimes the best way to prove your worth is not by fighting for recognition from people who refuse to see it, but by finding people who already do.